Welcome back. We're going to be starting a new chapter, Chapter 3. We're going to be talking about plants, different kinds of plants, how they grow, how they reproduce, what they need to reproduce. It's an exciting chapter. Before we get into our lesson, which is starting on page 52 today, and it will go all the way to page 55, before we get into that, I do want you to look, if you have your student book with you, I want you to look at page 63 in your book. Now, we're going to talk more about this later, maybe, but maybe if you are with your mom and dad, they can do this project with you at home. But I want you to look in the experiment. There's a problem or a question that we need to answer. And I'm starting this right at the beginning of this chapter so you can monitor or observe your experiment as we go along and learn the different parts of plants and the different parts of flowers, different parts of seeds. And you can do this project at the same time. So the problem is, can you look on page 63? It says, do green beans seeds, that's the key word, seeds, need light to germinate? I'll say the problem again. This is a problem that we're discussing in this experiment. And when we do an experiment, we're trying to answer that question. So you can do this again with mom and dad. Do green bean seeds need light to germinate? Okay? And it's very, very simple. You take 2 cups, and you don't have to use green bean seeds. You can use any kind of seed here. We're using sunflower seeds. And in this cup, there's 1 seed, and you plant it, you make a hole right in the side of the cup, not in the middle, because you want to see the seed germinate. So you take your finger and you press it along the side of the cup, and it'll make a hole, and you drop the seed in and kind of cover it with dirt, but make sure that you can see the seed. It's a little bit difficult for you to see. I'll hold it up to the camera. The seed is right there. And then you do the same thing with another cup. This is my students. Their seed is right there. They circled it. Okay, I don't know if you can see that or not. And it's okay if you can't. And you put 1 cup, and their cup is in the sunlight, and then you hide the other cup. And every day you observe to see whether or not it will germinate. And the word germinate means to begin to grow or to sprout. So the question is, does it need sunlight to germinate? Okay, so you can look in your activity manual on page 51 and 52 to do this experiment. All right, let's go back to the beginning of our chapter on page 52. Now, I have here, you can see, this is a pencil. All right, this is not a very magical device or something scientific. No, it's just a simple pencil. But what is a pencil usually made of? Well, as you said wood, that would be correct. And where does wood come from? Well, it comes from a tree. And a tree is a plant. Well, can a pencil, like this pencil, can it make more pencils? Can this one make another pencil? Well, of course, the answer would be no. But can trees make other trees? The answer is yes. What is the difference? Both are made of wood. But the answer is this is not living anymore. Only living things can make new living things. All right? A tree is alive, but the pencil is not. Therefore, it cannot make something new. All right, so we're going to talk about flowers first when we talk about plants. Let's look on page 52, please. If you walk through a park, you will see many kinds of plants. There may be tall trees, perhaps bushes and flowers are growing in flower beds. Even the grass on the lawn is a plant. The Bible tells us that God planted a garden. In this garden, he put every tree that is pleasant to the sight, meaning nice to look at, and good for food. God provided plants for Adam and Eve to enjoy as well as to eat. One of the first jobs Adam had was to take care of the garden. His work would have been similar to that of a landscape architect. If you want to learn a little bit more about that, you can look on the previous page, on page 51. Like Adam, people who work with plants today study flowers and seeds. They study the life cycle of plants and how to classify them or to put them into groups. They learn all they can about plants. All of this research is important if a person who handles or takes care of plants wants to please the Lord in his work. So the first kind of plant we're going to talk about are flowers. This is a good thing to underline, all living things reproduce or make more of the same kind. Okay, reproduce is to make a copy of itself. Okay, that's a key word, that's a vocabulary word, I would highlight that. God made some plants with flowers to help the plants reproduce or to make a new one. A flower is a part of some plants that make seeds. Flowers come in many sizes, shapes, and colors. They may smell sweet or have no smell at all. Some even smell very bad to us. Yet all flowers have an important job. They allow the plants to reproduce. God designed each plant's flower to be exactly right for that plant. And something, a little side note here, looking in Genesis, especially in Genesis chapter 1, you need to be careful. It says the word after its kind. And that's super, super important. A sunflower cannot make a rose, or a lily can't make a daisy. A sunflower is always going to make a sunflower. Okay? Let's keep going. When you think of a flower, you most likely think of its petals first. The petals are often the most colorful part of a flower. Some flowers, such as lilies or roses, have big, showy, or colorful petals. The brightly colored petals attract insects and other animals. These living things help the plant to reproduce. Okay? And we kind of learned this about insects and spiders in the last chapter. Insects are very, very important. They have a partnership with plants. They get food from the plant, and the plant then gets pollinated. And we're going to learn about that word later in this chapter, or later in this lesson. So they work together in a partnership. Without insects, many of our flowers could not reproduce or to make new ones. Other plants, such as some grasses, do not need other living things to help them reproduce. So not all of them need insects to help them to pollinate. But the ones with the big flowers, like in your book here, sunflowers and this big lily on page 53, yes, they definitely need insects to help pollinate or move the pollen to the pistil. And we'll talk a little bit more about it in this lesson. Okay, so we have the first part here, and I have a little picture of a flower here. What is our first part that we talked about? That is called the petal, and those are these big shaped, kind of leaf shape, what we want to call it. But usually they're the colorful part, and the part that smells very good, or like it mentioned, some flowers don't smell very good at all. But they are called the petals. Right? Petals. Let's learn about the other parts of these flowers. Another part of the flower is the stamen. A stamen is a thin stalk with a knob, kind of like a doorknob, structure at its top. This knob-like structure produces or makes pollen. Pollen is made up of tiny dust-like grains. And if you look at a flower, and maybe if you touch parts of the flower, you'll get this little yellow or kind of orange color dust on your fingers. That is pollen. And it actually, it's very, very important to the flower. It's what helps make the seed. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. These grains of pollen are needed for the plant to reproduce or to make a new flower or a new plant. In the center or the middle of the flower is a long tube called the pistil. The pistil is the part of the flower that receives or gets the pollen. The top of the pistil is often sticky. This sticky surface helps trap pollen that lands on it. All right, so let's stop there for a moment. Let's label the rest of our flower. Now, there are more parts to this flower, but we're only going to focus on 3 main parts. Later, if you keep going in this curriculum, in grade 6, we're going to learn a lot more details about flowers. But we're going to just stick to the main parts today. All right, so here, this thin here with this knob-like thing on the top, that is called the stamen. Okay? and then the one part in the middle that is called the pistil. Now, some interesting things about this. I want you to remember, what does the petal do? It's what attracts insects. It attracts insects or animals. Its job is to attract insects. So this flower can be pollinated. Okay? All right. Then we have the stamen. Now, you might think this is kind of strange, but I want you to think about this just for a moment. Just think about it if you have a younger brother or sister. Now, what two people were needed to give you a younger brother or sister? Well, of course, our mom and dad. And right. And where, of the mom and dad, who had the baby growing inside of them for almost between 9 and 10 months? That's right, the mom did. Okay? So you need a boy and a girl to reproduce, or to make a baby, or to make something after its kind. And that's true in all the animal kingdom. There has to be a male boy and a female girl. But with our flowers, do you see boy flowers and girl flowers? Not usually. There are some trees where there are male and female trees, but we're not going to talk about this. But with flowers, not male or female flowers. But on the same plant, on the flower, there are what we call the male part, and there is a female part. Male means boy, female means girl. So can you guess which part is male and which part is female? Well, the stamen, that is the male part. That's the boy part. Okay? And the stamen makes pollen. Okay? And when we get to the 6th grade, we're going to talk more about pollen and its job, but it's really interesting what the pollen does. So can you guess which part is the girl part? Well, of course, it's the pistil. It's the female part. So both are on the same plant. And this one makes the pollen. This one receives pollen. Okay. Now, something very, very interesting, if you didn't know this, that flowers have eggs. Did you know this? Flowers inside this part, the bottom of the pistil, have eggs. Now, they're not chicken eggs, but there are tiny little eggs inside of this. So if you open up a pistil and look, you'll see these tiny little eggs inside the flower, or inside the pistil. And when the pollen reaches the top of the pistil, what happens, it has two jobs. It will split in two, and one part of the pollen will dig a tunnel down to here where the eggs are. Then the other part falls through that tunnel and then connects with these eggs, and those eggs turn into seeds. And the seeds are the beginning part of reproducing these flowers or making a new flower. It's really interesting, but I promise we'll get into more detail later on. All right, let's look on page 54, please. A flowering plant produces a seed or makes a seed in order to reproduce itself, like I mentioned. For a seed to form, the pollen must move from the stamen to the pistil. The transfer or moving of pollen to the pistil is called pollination. So you want to highlight that in your book, pollination. All right, so I repeat this definition all the time with my students. What is pollination? The moving of pollen from the stamen to the pistil. Let's say it again. What is pollination? The moving of pollen from the stamen to the pistil. Now, there's not just one kind of way. There are actually 4 different kinds of ways. We kind of combine it, 2 of them into one group, but there's actually 4 different ways. Okay? In sunflowers, the stamen is higher than the pistil. The pollen simply falls from the stamen to the pistil, and the flower pollinates itself. This is called self-pollination. So in this case, if the stamen is taller than the pistil, gravity just pulls the pollen down. Doesn't need any help from insects or animals. It does it all by itself, self-pollination. It gives you a picture here of a flower where the stamen is taller than the pistil. Let's keep going though. Most plants, however, do not self-pollinate. Usually, pollen is transferred or moved from one plant to another plant. The wind is another way plants are pollinated. It carries the pollen from one plant to another. Grasses and grains such as wheat and corn, also rice is another one, are pollinated by the wind. So ones with your really tiny small flowers are usually pollinated by the wind. And the wind will pick up the pollen and carry it to other flowers, and it will stick to the pistil, and then it will be pollinated. The third way is by animals. Now this is where we combine it into one group, but it's actually, I like to study it as two different groups. Flowers often store or have nectar. Insects such as butterflies and bees eat or collect the nectar. As they move from flower to flower, they also transfer or move pollen. While one flower of an insect brushes against the other, which sticks to, let's say that sentence again. While in one flower, an insect brushes against the pollen, which sticks to the insect. When the insect goes to the next flower, the pollen may come off of the insect and stick to the pistil of the flower. So if you look here, in this case, this one cannot self-pollinate. Why? Because the stamen is not taller than the pistil, okay? Not like our one in our book. So they're shorter. So what would come along is maybe a cute little bee, and I'm not going to make it perfectly to have the 3 body sections. I'm just going to make a cute little bee. Okay, so the bee here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, comes in, flies, and he's wanting to get nectar. So he comes in, he's drinking the nectar here, and this dust gets all over its body, okay? Well, it's done drinking the nectar from this flower, and it flies off to another flower, and then as it's getting from this nectar, maybe it happens to touch the pistil, and some of that pollen sticks to the pistil, okay? So it's really important that insects are here. Even if you don't like insects, they're extremely important because they help to pollinate these different flowers. And if we didn't have pollination, we couldn't make seeds. If we couldn't have seeds, we can't reproduce these flowers. We would be in trouble, and we would be missing out on a lot of plant life. Okay? So insect pollination, wind pollination, self-pollination, and then I mentioned also animal pollinations. I kind of separate that into another group, like small birds and bats. Let's keep going, page 55. Insects are not the only animals that help pollinate flowers. Hummingbirds also feed on nectar or drink the nectar. There's a picture on page 55. Like insects, they may transfer pollen as they move from one flower to another. Bats help pollinate many kinds of fruit trees. Some mango and peach trees rely or depend on bats to move pollen from one tree to another. Without the help of bats, the trees could not reproduce. Now, I'm not a fan of bats, but I do like mangoes and I do like peaches. And without those animals, the pollen couldn't move from the stamen to the pistil, and therefore we couldn't have those fruits. Last paragraph. Animals and flowers help each other. A flower's shape may attract an animal. An animal may also be attracted by a flower's color or odor. The flower is pollinated, or the pollen moved from the stamen to the pistil, and the animal gets food. God designed the two to help each other in a partnership. This is just one way God shows how He cares for living things. All right, so let's do a little review. All right, what are the 3 main parts of a flower? We have the showy petals, and they attract the animals. This is where you would find the smell, and of course they're colorful. Then we have the stamen, which is the male part, and it makes pollen. It makes pollen. And then we have the pistil, which is in the center. It is the female part, or the girl part, and it's what gets the pollen. And we mentioned that inside the pistil, there are eggs. And the pollen goes down, connects with the eggs to make seeds. And then we can reproduce that flower from the seed. And there are 4 ways of pollination. The first one we learned about was self-pollination. The pistil is shorter than the stamen. Second one, wind pollination. Grass, wheat, corn, rice, that's all wind pollination. The wind picks up the pollen, puts it on the pistil. Third way, insects, like bees, coming to collect nectar to drink. And also it collects some of the pollen too. And then it goes to another flower and pollinates another flower. Then we have animals like hummingbirds and bats that help move pollen from the stamen to the pistil. Okay, on page 55, there are 2 questions for you to answer. And also activity manual, page 42, to help you understand what we just learned. I'll see you next time.